Hi, I'm Kara McGlynn, Lead School Social Worker for Northeast Metro 916, joining to present today as part of our district consultation team, specifically in regards to anxiety as a parallel process in educating during COVID-19. I'm going to keep it real short and sweet for y'all today. We're going to talk about the what and the why, and I'll be providing some stress and anxiety busting tips. Just as a note, these tips will differ from Kevin's self-care tips. So if you're thinking about turning off my presentation because you watch Kevin Horsts, please don't. That was me trying to be funny. We're all living in this unprecedented period of global uncertainty. It's completely normal right now to be experiencing a wide range of emotions, and accepting our feelings is an important first step in order to build resilience. The simple act of naming our emotions has been found to benefit well-being. Perhaps you've heard before the phrase, to name it is to tame it. So just take a moment right now to tune into your body and notice how you're feeling. Perhaps you're feeling like some of these emotions I listed here on the slide. These were some emotions that my peers at Cora Secondary School shared as we are going into our enhanced distance learning model. It's important to remember it's okay to feel discomfort. Accepting distress is often the quickest way to immediately feel calmer. So what is stress? I really like this quote by the author of The Upside of Stress because it frames it in a really meaningful way for educators. So stress is what arises when something we care about is at stake. The terms stress and anxiety are often used interchangeably. So to develop a deeper understanding of mental well-being, I think it's helpful to understand how they differ. Many of us are now in positions where things that matter to us feel more uncertain than ever before, which understandably gives a rise to our stress response. And stress is best understood as manifesting in the body. It's that racing heart, the sweaty palms, that funny feeling in our tummy that we're all familiar with. Central to the experience of stress is the amygdala response. And the amygdala is that area in your brain that's responsible for generating your body's stress. Experts typically agree that the core component of stress is the perception of threat and danger. You've probably heard about fight or flight stress responses before as a reaction to perceived danger. Typically, when we talk about it at 916 in trainings, we're talking about it in relationship to trauma. And it can be a component of toxic or automatic stress. And toxic or auto stress is what happens to our body's stress response when stress goes on for too long of a time. I like to frame it as too much for too long. It's our body's way of protecting ourselves if there is a potential threat, but when there's really no perceivable threat that we can immediately respond to, what happens is that we experience this wide range of physical stress symptoms on an ongoing basis. Often we find people reporting that they're feeling anxiety, but they don't necessarily have an apparent reason. However, our all apparent reason now is COVID-19. So I just do want to honor that anyone who's saying they are totally okay right now might not be being very transparent with themselves. It's important to note that if you are suffering from high levels of distress, which is triggered by the pandemic, you might continue to feel this way after the virus has passed. And all of this is true for our students and scholars. Many of us feel a lot of stress right now. And as adults, we might be able to recognize and say, wow, I'm stressed out. For kids, no matter how old they are, they might not necessarily recognize it, verbalize it, or know how to show up in the same way that adults do when we're managing stress. During challenging times, our bodies also make more stress hormones than usual, and this can show up differently in different people. So For really young children, they might have difficulties in sleeping and eating patterns. They also might regress back to developmental milestones that they've already achieved. One of the most common ways stress shows itself in school-age children is in their behavior. They might be more irritable, more bouncing off the walls, expressing boredom more frequently, having a harder time managing their impulses or paying attention or focusing, or brand new behaviors might arise. Teenagers and adolescents may become even more withdrawn. However, a lot of kids aren't going to necessarily show any behavioral symptoms at all. For some kids, increased stress hormones show up somatically. So, headaches, stomach aches, difficulty sleeping, worsening health issues like asthma or eczema, or more frequent infections. In teenagers, we might see more risk-taking behaviors like substance use, such as tobacco, marijuana, vaping, alcohol, and other substances, as well as increased interest in sexual contact. Our female students might also see changing in relationship to their menstrual cycle. And it's just helpful to keep in mind that these changes our students are experiencing aren't just in their head. Increased stress leads to biological changes in our brains and bodies that impact our health and our kids' health, behavior, and development. The good news for all of this is that there are some simple things that we can do every day to support our students' stress response system and buffer some of the negative impacts of stress. And we'll get into that. Anxiety, simply succinctly defined, is unhelpful thinking patterns we experience when our mind fixates on threat, uncertainty, and negativity. Anxiety is commonly described as having both mental and physical symptoms. And the distinction between the mental and physical anxiety is important because different tools are required for addressing the physical symptoms. So thinking about the auto stress we mentioned during anxiety or during stress, and the mental symptoms, which we typically label as anxiety. So physical symptoms go under that somatic symptoms related to auto stress. Mental symptoms are typically labeled as anxiety. Anxiety can occur on its own as a response to a stress, or it can trigger stress. When it occurs as a response to stress, it can intensify the stress and in worst cases lead to things like panic attacks. It's important to understand that you cannot control anxiety from occurring. It's your brain's automatic survival mechanism. What matters is learning how to respond to anxiety. That's what's the most helpful. So hopefully you don't get carried away by it. A lot of the SEL competencies and lessons that MDE recommends and all the evidence-based curriculums that are available to us give our students and ourselves useful skill instruction to support when we are feeling anxious, how we can respond to that anxiety, again, so we don't spiral and get carried away. I really wanted to highlight here that when we as educators are well regulated, even though our students and scholars might be struggling in very hard situations, we are better able and equipped to support them in calming and soothing than we are when everyone in the situation, so the student and the staff, are presenting feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, and angry. All that happens then is that everyone becomes dysregulated and we're not able to get back to calm. It's important as a note as we're going again through this parallel process where no one is really coming in a calm area. Most people, be it staff or students, are already starting with this heightened sense of alert or alarm because of the pandemic. And then as we go throughout our day, if we as staff are not taking care of ourselves and we are not teaching students direct strategies to manage that stress and anxiety, then all that happens is that we continue to perpetuate that cycle. And so that our students are not actually learning anything because their brain is then in that high fear or terror response. And we're leaving feeling completely stressed out that we haven't accomplished anything, and we're heightened maybe in that alarm or fear response. So the last slide showed the importance of co-regulation in that when we are calm and regulated, our students are able to come along with us. So self-regulation is influenced by external factors like the environment, COVID-19, and interactions with others, and by internal factors such as our personal temperament. The particular temperament of a person is typically something that they're born with, and it does impact how easily they're able to regulate themselves. So then co-regulation is defined as warm and responsive interactions that provide support, coaching, and modeling that students need in order to understand, express, modulate their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Co-regulating requires teachers and all providers to pay really close attention to the cues children send and respond consistently and sensitively over time with just the right amount of support. It's really important that we take our cues from students on this, but in order to accomplish this, again, we have to be coming in fairly regulated. So how do we do that? Like I said, I promised you would get into some tips and tricks for ourselves, as well as things that we can use in our classroom spaces. So on this little graphic here, you will notice there are 6 categories. I am going to hit strategies in each of these 6 that you can do in class and at home or individually in order to support stress and anxiety. The first one I want to highlight is supportive relationships. Double down on supportive relationships right now. If they're within your household, maintain your connections with your friends, loved ones outside of the house. If you have people in your home, it's a little easier, but if you're connecting with friends and loved ones outside of the home, phone, video chat, old-fashioned letter writing is really appropriate. And again, these are things that you can do with your students too. You could do a whole lesson on writing a letter to someone if you're an English teacher, and you could incorporate that into social emotional learning. You could also do some lessons or instruction around age-appropriate social media. We could also, as staff, use age-appropriate social media. When we are able to be with persons in real life, turning off media and devices is really important to encourage that high-quality time together. And we can do activities like making art, dancing, cooking, reading together at home. It's important now more than ever that we remain in touch with those people that are most important to us, be them mentors, friends, family, etc. Next, I want to talk a little bit about exercise. And I know as a self-care strategy, you all might be bored to death with this. And there are ways to incorporate it into your classroom space that can be really helpful, even virtually. It's important that every day people engage in some sort of physical activity. Around 60 minutes is kind of, I believe, what the government agencies say, and it doesn't have to be all at once. You can have dance parties during Zoom or Google Meet classes. You can have 35 jumping jacks here and there. You can do a hula hoop contest. You can film a dance on a TikTok and have your students share it out. You can do goofy power walking on your own. Take a lap between classes if you can, or make sure to build in stretch breaks. You can do bedtime yoga personally. Again, you can share tips and tricks on that for your students and scholars. Push-ups are great. Really every 15 to 20 minutes, especially on digital platforms, we need to get our bodies and our students' bodies moving, and we need to get our heart rates up just a little to burn off some of that stress. So do it collectively. Again, it's a social emotional learning strategy as well as a great life skill. And if you are a Phi Ed teacher, you're welcome. I just did your lesson planning. Sorry, like I said, I think I'm funny. Anyway. All right, healthy sleep. Again, this is a self-care strategy you might feel that we've just beaten to death, and it's so important. That's why we keep talking about it. It is imperative that you and your learners, as much as possible, get sufficient high quality sleep. And this is really hard right now. It's really hard because of the current cultural context of COVID-19, the elections happening, the racial violence and uprising in our community. Our brains are all over the place. And there are things that we can do to help us go to sleep. And one of the best things is waking up at the same time every day and having a routine before bed. Again, these are things you can encourage your families that you work with and your students to try to incorporate. If possible, creating a calm place for sleep, limiting food and beverages like that are highly caffeinated, soda, chocolate, coffee, cut those off at a certain time of night. Turn off electronics, turn off electronics at least an hour before bed. So much research on that. And again, share this with your students, share this with their families. It's really easy to read these things. I don't know how many times I've heard the electronics thing, but then I tried it and I was like, oh, I get why they said that. So if you're struggling with any of these, I would encourage you to try some of these tactics and tricks and see if they're supportive to you. Nutrition's highlighted on this wheel, and it is all about just ensuring that you're getting proper nutrition to help combat stress. So keeping regular meal times, which I realize in education is kind of a hard joke, but as much as possible, try to keep a regular meal time and try to have snacks. And if you have a snack practice that you can incorporate with your learners, if your district is sending food home, certainly do that during this platform. I mean, we could all take a snack break right now if we were live. It's important to, when you look at the research related to stress and anxiety, to, as much as possible, minimize refined carbohydrates, minimize high fat and high sugar foods, and try to reduce, as educators, our alcohol intake. Obviously, a good rule of thumb in general is to follow the guidelines about daily servings of fruit and vegetables, it's like 5 to 9, and ensure that we're getting foods rich in omega-3 fatty acids, including fish and nuts and fiber. I also want to highlight here the mental and behavior health support. It's important to normalize mental health and how everyone's feeling right now by having really frank, direct conversations with our peers and with our learners about the stress and or anxiety they might be feeling. If you do engage in mental health care, continue to. Don't skip appointments because we're doing telehealth. Yes, it feels really weird. And as a provider, I will tell you it is not my preferred way of practicing. However, it's really important to maintain that connection, even if it feels different. Minimize the amount of exposure / consumption of news and other media content that might feel upsetting for you and or your students. So just be really thoughtful if you are doing any kind of media that you're sharing with students during the course of a school day. Gauge them. How are they doing with it? They might feel really overwhelmed. And if they do, it's okay to take a break. If your students currently see a mental health professional, as much as you can, and this is appropriate, encourage the family to continue that practice, again, staying within the scope of our practice. Have open conversations with your students about emotional and mental health. The more we destigmatize it, the more we can have really direct conversations, even in typical practice, the better off we are. But certainly during COVID times, it's imperative that we all talk about how no one's really okay right now. It'll normalize it, and I think you'll have an opportunity to really impact a lot of kids just by being frank about, yeah, it's really scary. I'm scared. And it also plays into the tenets of trauma-aware care. Also, please check with your school districts to ensure that if you and or one of your students is feeling like they are in crisis, that there are supports available. Know that they are there. I just don't know with all of our member districts what those supports are. So if we have any of our directors here or principal managers, if you haven't already shared those out with your staff in a really accessible way, I would encourage you to think about that. Mindfulness. The practice of mindfulness, and that can be meditation, yoga, silent reflection. It's really encouraged like 2 times a day, totaling about 20 minutes is where research says is the sweet spot. There's tons of apps like Headspace and Calm, which are easy. They're really accessible. Again, you can do them when you're doing digital teaching via teleplatforms. There's also tons of different meditation things that you can find online. And there's a lot of different videos like on YouTube that specialize for kids of all ages. So you can, put in the age range like mindfulness for high school. Mindfulness can help strengthen the pathways in the brain that are actively buffer against the stress response. It helps making your body regulate much more easy. So it's important, again, that you just take a moment throughout the day to notice where your students are at and notice where you're at and check in about those feelings and talk about, physically and emotionally, how are people doing? Again, it's connected to social emotional learning through the MDE competencies and CASTLE, as well as connected to different portions of education that aren't always, here's the math worksheet, which, isn't necessarily what we're all focusing on right now anyway. There's been a ton of research done too on cultivating gratitude as a practice and how there's a plethora of benefits to it. Research has shown us that it can be stress reducing, it can boost mood, it can strengthen your immune system, it can boost sleep. And a really simple way to cultivate a gratitude practice is to keep a gratitude log. This could be a really simple activity that you do at home and or engage in practice with your students. Breathing. We do it all the time. And super intentional breathing and taking breathing breaks really helps us to manage our stress response. Right now, it's important that we adjust our expectations. We recognize that COVID-19 is temporary and that during this time, we might not be as productive as we had hoped to be every day. Neither will our students. That's okay. We're balancing our household responsibilities, ensuring that if you have children, that they are doing distance learning while you are also teaching, working through your own stress, etc. All of these things, even individually, can be incredibly intense. Give yourself permission to let go of judgment that you're not doing it right or not doing enough. Do the best you can with what you can right now to minimize your stress for both yourself and your students. Ask for help, take a moment, open up lines of communication at work, at home, in the community. You could do things with your students like have a special code word if they are really feeling stressed that you share during your class. Code word kazoo, and if a student types kazoo into a chat or shouts it out, that could be an indicator that it's time to take a brief break. It can be 1 to 2 minutes even, but any of these strategies, even in 1 to 2 minutes, can really impact our ability, again, to build resilience and mitigate stress. If you're having a really hard time right now, it's normal. Unfortunately, it's expected. So just don't be hard on yourself. And please give that same grace to your students. I did highlight on this slide a belly breathing practice, and this is something that we put in as a goal for one of my students we're using during our social emotional lessons. So one of my students said that they really liked doing belly breathing, and we noticed his class was pretty dysregulated by a fourth hour. So the whole class now is doing 5 minutes of belly breathing. That's their warm up. I really liked too that research does show that practicing regular belly breathing can help people feel calmer within a matter of weeks. If you're not interested in doing this collectively with your classrooms, even doing this at home before you get out of bed, so upon waking, there's been really good research to indicate that this grounds us and centers us as we move on to our day. All right, these next few slides as I'm wrapping up are some goal lists that were provided by Nadine Burke-Harris, who is the Surgeon General of California. I'm a huge fan. She's also big on the adverse childhood experiences and working to mitigate them. Yeah, she's basically a rock star in the mental health world. She's a doctor. So I thought these lists, as we wrap up the slides, are really cool because they connect to the SEL competencies. These are strategies that you can incorporate to do collectively with your learners or at home. So, if you were to go through, again, those 6 areas, you could set a goal as a class, like for nutrition. You could for sleep, exercise, supportive relationships, self-care, and then collectively come back together and process, how did that go for you? Are you making progress? People are more likely to follow through with goals when they put them out to other people. And then if you're collaborating on a goal, you're more able to support, again, their learning and follow through. But also, it's really helpful to get some information back. So if people are resistant, if they've said, yeah, I am going to make a plan for when I feel stressed out as a student, and then they don't, having even the conversation around why they don't can be really important for our fact finding so that we can help them problem solve through that. All right, I just wanted to end on a reminder that we are all in this crazy world together. As educators, we will collectively come out of this with hopefully better systems and services, more creative ways of doing things, and we will get through it, period. So we're all in it together. The last slide here, just some additional resources and tools I thought people might be interested in looking at if you were looking for more ways to support yourself or to support students. Thanks so much for your time today.